Great. Um, I will call this meeting to order. Welcome to the City of Ann Arbor Planning Commission working session for the September 10th, 2024 session. I think that this is, given that it's a working session, we're not going to call roll. What we will do is go straight to public comment. So Planner Leonard, do we have any folks that want to speak in public comment?
We do.
Great.
Caller with a phone number ending with 267. You have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission. You might have to press *6 to unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard and Chair Lee. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. This is Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. Well, I knew this day was coming, eliminating public hearings for by right site plans in the name of more housing. This is a solution in search of a problem. Look, we need more housing, and we should fix the development review process. But the public hearing isn't the bottleneck. Any developer will tell you that the bottleneck is the siloing of city departments, which adds months to the process. We get rid of the public hearing, we say, what, 10 days at most? If you replace public hearings with public comment for each site plan, the least bad option on your table, the notice requirement is gone. Yes, your bylaws specify posting agendas the Friday before the meeting, quote, to the extent practicable, unquote. I personally need sometimes the full 2 weeks notice to review some of these plans. 4 days is not enough. And future staff may decide that even that is not practicable. The Open Meetings Act just says that meeting agendas must be posted 2 hours before the meeting. Also, without a formal public hearing, agenda items, including site plans, can, in theory, be added during the meeting itself by unanimous vote. I'm not saying you'll do this, but someone else might. Don't open this Pandora's box. Just say no. Staff also proposes to eliminate PUD site plan public hearings at City Council. Currently, Council holds 2 public hearings the same night, one for rezoning and one for the site plan. Now we'll have just one for the rezoning. You can't even argue efficiency here. You're saving a few minutes. This is really about limiting public input. Finally, the community participation meeting will move from before plan submission to after, potentially only 3 weeks before you vote. By then, the site plan is done. The developer won't care what we say at that point unless you amplify our voice, and you won't be there. The main effect will be to keep us unaware that a plan even exists until a few weeks before it's voted on. Public ignorance is not a civic good. To sum up, staff tonight proposes to end public hearings for by right site plans, for area plans, and for PUD site plans at Council, and to move the community participation meeting much later. My advice to you, don't even try to finesse these changes. Just reject them. They have nothing to do with the housing shortage. Instead, focus on fixing things that really are holding up more housing. And I don't have time to talk about Design Review Board, but that should be retained as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Garber. Planner Leonard, do we have any other callers?
No other listeners have raised their hand to speak.
Got it. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, with that, we'll close this working session's public comment and we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is the presentation. This is the Housing Affordable for All Levels, which we received a memo on. So Planner Leonard, if you wanted to kick this one off.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner, for your continued service this evening. And this is perhaps going to be the most visually boring presentation that you've ever received. I did share with you in advance, of course, and the public memo that outlines a couple of ordinance changes that I'd like your feedback on tonight. Just a couple reminders to set the stage before we dive into it. One, these These ordinance changes are in response to direction from the City Council. The City Council has directed staff and the Planning Commission to consider some of these changes. In doing so and approaching them, as one of our callers, as the commenters referenced, I want to be clear. I am bringing a couple other proposed changes for your consideration. I am doing my absolute best to be transparent about what of those changes that I think go above and beyond the specific direction of the City Council. And then as a reminder for all of you, there's no decision tonight. This is a work session, so this is an opportunity for you as the commission to help provide me and my team with feedback about the best way to approach these, modify them, present any information to you that would be helpful when this appears on the full Planning Commission agenda for actual consideration, and of course, a public hearing as part of that. So with that precursor, there I think are about 4 different directions that are outlined in this memo. Available to the public and all of you is some draft track changes versions of applicable sections of most of the proposed referenced. There's still some work to do, but I thought it was at least far enough along where we can start having some conversations and getting some feedback from you. So unless you have any questions about it more broadly, I'd just like to jump into them sort of one at a time. I'll introduce the direction from the council, and then, as I said, try to identify those components that are responsive to that and other options that I'd like to present for your feedback, whether it's something you're interested in pursuing or not. So any questions before we get started? All right. So first off is the proposed amendments to the citizen participation ordinance. This is a direction from the City Council that citizen participation requirements are made digitally through city communication channels. So it's a citywide effort, and that we would endeavor to maintain a calendar of meetings on the website that would be available not only to immediate residents, but all residents across the city, and to make that concurrent with site plan submission. So I will say some of the background that I've heard from this is that at times I think that there have definitely been aspects of citizen participation that have been more successful. But I will also say that we've heard also a lot, and I'm sure longtime members of the Planning Commission have heard the same, that we also hear feedback that it doesn't have much trajectory change to the projects that are being considered by the Planning Commission. We have 2 currently proposed tracks for citizen participation. One is type 1 projects or larger projects. Other is type 2, which are smaller projects. The former requires currently that a meeting is held and noticed to all property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the proposed project. That has to be held within a certain time frame prior to the application being submitted for the city for application. On one hand, I do certainly see the critique that is shortening an opportunity for feedback. On the flip side, I will say that once you are nearing the typical timeframe when these citizen participation meetings are happening, a lot of site design work has been accomplished. Actually, a lot of engineering work has been done. A lot of stormwater modeling has been done. So it is an imperfect timing as it exists now about how much there really is opportunity for feedback and what the likelihood is for a petitioner to drastically change their approach or their plan from that meeting. So to be clear, staff doesn't go to those meetings. I can't sit here and tell you that, of the meetings that I've attended, that I think that X percentage of them have been productive or not. But I will express that I have not seen significant evolution of projects, often from concept through citizen participation to what is presented to the city for meeting the technical requirements of our ordinance. So the council direction is just that, to provide a more efficient timing aspect to that proposed change. What the ordinance that I presented in the draft would envision is that a petition could be submitted to the city, and then the citizen participation process could happen concurrently with the review by city departments. Instead of requiring that meeting and the report to be submitted prior to the application to the city, it would have to be submitted within a time frame prior to consideration by either the planning manager, the planning commission, or the city council, depending on the body that is approving that site plan. And of course, the methodology of us communicating a calendar, maintaining digital communication of that's not something that has to be memorialized in ordinance. Those would be steps that we could do as the city by utilization of our communication tools, our website, and the like. I have proposed and raised in the memo a couple of additional changes that I would like to propose for your consideration. One is citizen. The term citizen can be very specific, and I think we've talked about this at the Planning Commission before. It could be that could be a barrier to somebody participating if they don't have citizenship or feel like they don't have the right kind of legal ability to be here in our community. So one of the changes I would propose is actually changing it to resident or community participation more broadly rather than citizen, because that can be potentially a term that might be off-putting to somebody that would otherwise engage. And then one of the other questions that I would like to propose as part of this is that we have a lot of the public hearing requirements that are currently reflected in our ordinance and would be proposed to be maintained are stipulated by state law that requires a 300-foot radius notification process. Our current citizen participation ordinance establishes 2 additional radiuses for communication. One is 1,000 foot if a meeting is to be held, and one is 500 feet if a notice is to be held. Neither are consistent with the eventual any public hearing requirements. And so that's another one that I want to pose the question to the Planning Commission. Do you see, or do we see value in making that buffer consistent so that when we're communicating, whether it's a developer communicating their project or we're advertising a public hearing, that is a consistent list that the same people are going to get the same notification at different milestones in that project? So let's stop there. I'm looking for your feedback of, yes, this seems like in the right direction, other questions you have, and particularly about some of these other aspects. Do you think it's something that you're interested in pursuing and potentially considering for recommendation to the city council? Or it's okay if you want to really be more narrow to the more specific direction that the council resolution endorses.
Got it. Thank you, Punter Leonard. Commissioner Abrams, if you want to kick us off, thanks.
Hi, thank you. I just want to make sure that we're being very, very clear for ourselves, but also for the public. So, Brett, can you just restate kind of like currently community participation meetings have to happen in blank time frame in the proposal when they would happen, and what concurrent means?
Yeah, sure. So right now, there are a series of what I will call pre-development steps that the city requires, depending on the project, before we will even accept your application fee, and your site plan to start the technical review of your plan. We require a pre-submission meeting, which is where that is sort of the first I don't want to say cursory because it's more than that, but it's the first review of a site plan with all of the city departments to make sure that that petitioner has the benefit of knowing this plan has all the information that we are going to need in order to determine technical compliance with the ordinance or not. So it might be some of the things that might happen at the pre-submission meeting is, hey, for your stormwater, we noticed that you haven't figured out what the infiltration rate is for your soil. We're going to need that in order to determine adequacy of your approach. Or based on your transportation modeling, if that goes over a certain number of trips per peak hour, we're going to need a traffic impact analysis to figure out how this site is going to interact with our street network, both vehicular and non-vehicular, in order for us to determine the safety aspects of it. And currently, if it is a type 1 project, you have to notice all residents within, property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the site, give them notice at least 15 days prior to a meeting that you're going to hold. That meeting either can be in person or it can be held via Zoom. And then that meeting must occur a minimum of 10 days before you actually submit all of that information to the city to say, hey, I would like the technical review of the site plan to occur. If it is a type 2 project, you concurrently with you go through all those same steps, but instead of the meeting in 1,000 feet, once you you submit your application, you then send a postcard out to property owners and residents within 500 feet saying, I've just submitted a type 2 project to the city for technical consideration. It will appear on an upcoming planning commission agenda. So that's how things work currently. Do you have any questions about the current situation before I go to how it might change to concurrent?
No.
Okay. So then what I'm attempting to do with this draft is to say that we're going to eliminate the citizen participation requirement uh, happening prior. So for type 2 projects, it might actually look very similar. Once you submit an application for a type 2 projects, at the time you submitted it, you would send out notice to everybody within 500 feet that I just submitted a project. The change would be for type 1 projects, larger projects. At the time you submitted that application, either at the same time or after, you would then send out an invitation to neighbors where it would be a one-on-one conversation with the petitioner and whoever attends, either via Zoom or in person, to discuss the project and receive feedback on it. Then that could happen while the same site plan is going through technical review by planners, by solid waste, by the fire department, by solid waste, et cetera, about technical compliance. And those reviews and that meeting result would have to merge and be submitted. That report of that meeting, when required, would then have to be submitted to the city. In this case, not prior to the initial application, but prior to it appearing on an agenda or up for consideration for approval. So it would end up being a public comment, basically, opportunity, either via a held meeting, just like now, like anybody can submit email, written comments, what have you. So the difference would be for larger projects that could happen concurrently with the city's technical review. It wouldn't have to be a precursor to the start of the city's technical review.
So would it be accurate to say that this change would make the type 1 process the same as what the type 2 process is now?
From a timing perception, yes. However, there's no proposed change to eliminate the meeting requirement. So larger projects would still require that petitioner opening up a dialogue with people who wanted to come to it. But the timing would be the same, whether it be a type 1 or 2.
And just so I understand the goal here, the quote unquote problem that we're trying to address here is to make the process take less time for the petitioner?
Well, a couple things. I would say, all of this is under the perception of efficiency of review. And I would say that is a benefit. If the citizen participation meeting is adding additional time to the review of a project, then it can impact the project. A longer review process is often more costly, more challenging than a shorter review process. So there are carrying costs if you have an option on the land. There are costs for consultants to attend 2 meetings versus 1 meeting. So I think it has that impact. The question with the citizen participation, though, too, I think that is overarching to this point is it substantially changing the projects that we're getting as well or not?
Well, I put that aside though for a moment. I'm just trying to understand what is the quote unquote problem that we're trying to address with the change? What is the thing that's being addressed? It's about what you're calling efficiency, which I would say, to be more specific, is how long it takes for a petitioner to get the project through the process.
As type 1 citizen participation adds at a minimum 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks to an application.
But what I want to try to understand is, so that 3 weeks you're saying is the 10 days plus the 15 days,
Yep.
right? The notice and the meeting.
Yep.
But can't that be happening while things are being prepared for the pre-submission meeting? In other words, I'm not understanding why that's an insertion of an additional 25 days as opposed to happening concurrently with another phase of work that would also be happening.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it probably typically happens concurrently with the preparation of that. But just as an example, like if you're a petitioner and for whatever reason you are lining up your pre-submission materials with that meeting, but then at the pre-submission meeting, you're like, you go through the city's, all of the city departments say, you're good, this looks ready to go. You either have had to get your plan to that level of completion 3.5 weeks prior to the deadline in order to build in the capacity of that meeting, or if it were to happen concurrently, that wouldn't be necessary. You could work through your pre-submission meeting at sort of your petitioner's own risk, but technically you could come in 2 days before our application deadline, go through it, and if it's good to go, you're good to go. So I think that I think you're right. I think a lot of that is happening simultaneously anyhow, but I think that petitioners, I think the intention of it actually now is early feedback. And again, I think it's adding time to the process that I don't know that it's actually resulting in changes. For the same reason, a lot of that work is happening concurrently, regardless, whether it was happening during technical review or pre-submission time.
Okay, one more question, then I'll let
Yeah.
let Commissioner Norton step in. I have a lot of questions, but I'll give up some time. Which is there anything in the UDC that describes or states the purpose of the citizen participation meeting
Yeah, absolutely.
in detail? And the reason I'm asking is because I don't want to, I think anecdotally we could talk about whether we think it matters or not, but I actually want to know, what is it supposed to do? And then we can talk about how do we assess whether it's achieving what it's supposed to be doing, as opposed to our kind of like sixth sense about whether they help or don't help, and how we weigh that against the additional time. I mean, that's what we have to weigh here. The benefit of the meeting against the potential risk of the extended timeline for the petitioner, right? So,
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like, I do my best to explain these processes and procedures, but if I'm not giving you the information you need, Commissioner Abrams, that's part of this too. Like, if you still unsure about things
I'm
like
not saying that. I mean, I think I will. I'm sure collectively
Yeah.
we will ask for more points of information. That's the point of this conversation. But no, I think what your explanation is clear. So I guess I just see it's section 5.28.4. That's what I should be looking at for. Okay, I'll go
And
look
just-
at that now and
Yeah.
let Commissioner Norton jump in.
And
Yeah.
if I could just interject one thing, this is, I just want to be clear, this is not a function of state law, this process. This was something manufactured and implemented voluntarily by the city. So we're not, to the question of intention, it's what we wanted. We have utmost flexibility to adjust it. So
That's definitely helpful clarification. Commissioner Abrams, thank you for your questions. Those are also super helpful. Yeah, we'll go to Commissioner Norton, and then I think Planner Shake, and then Councilmember Dish, and then Commissioner Adams. So yeah, Commissioner Norton.
There are a lot of raised hands to keep track of. Yeah. Brad, if I'm following this, the primary thing that's happening, you're not eliminating a public resident meeting with the developer. You're moving it for type 1 projects so it can happen simultaneously with the staff's technical review of the submission, correct?
correct.
Okay, so then I have two questions. One is, when the staff is doing the technical review now, do they even look at the public comments that were made, or is that aside from the technical review that you're doing? That's the first question. And the second question is, has the developer ever changed a project based on what they heard from the public meeting so that it affected what they submitted for the technical review? But those would be the two reasons I would think you don't want to eliminate this requirement. If there's meaningful input through that early intervention that's changing what the staff is doing. If it's not, then why have the early meeting? Why not consolidate them? That's what I'm trying to get to.
To the first question, I'm not aware. We don't rely on the report of the meeting to determine technical compliance. So the answer to the first is no. That is not the petitioner submitting detailed aspects of their plan for us to determine if it meets our requirements or not. So the first answer is no.
No,
As to
okay.
whether or not a project has ever changed, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect the answer is yes, they have. But I anticipate in a probably similar incremental fashion as they do through the technical review process, or even sometimes just modifications in response to like a technical review. For example, if transportation part of the reviews and says, we don't think you're addressing traffic adequately based on the requirements, that might result in a change. So That's kind of the second is a little bit unanswerable.
Harder to
I'm sure the
answer.
answer is yes, but it's probably, I don't know that it's in a more significant way than technical review does.
So they would still, they're getting their public feedback at the same time the staff's reviewing it. They're gonna have to go back and revisit the project. The question is, does making that concurrent meaningfully undercut the citizen input part of what's going on here?
Dilute or somehow negate that feedback because it's later in the process.
And it really is the type 1 projects that we're dealing with here in a meaningful way. Okay, thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Planner Shake, I think you had your hand up as a comment to something. Was it still relevant or should we move forward?
Quickly mention it, and just as like this overall like question of like transparency and capacity for the public to view projects. I think, I don't remember if it's in our charter or in the UDC, but it's kind of morphed over time that we maintain a now digital copy of all site plans under review now on our website. So our review system is integrated to a GIS system that's open source or open access on the website that you can access by map or search by address and click and actually view all the site plan files and related files. And even for other types of projects, like different types of projects, depending on the type of project, you can actually access those kind of at any point in time, as far as like a transparency to the general public question.
Got it. Thank you for the clarification about the transparency. Okay, and then so I have Councilmember Dish and then Commissioner Adams, and then I will go to Weatherby and Mills. So Councilmember Dish.
Thank you very much, Chair Lee. Thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so a few questions. Mr. Leonard, and I'll ask them all and then you can fire. You mentioned that these meetings are not required by state law and that the city adopted them for its purposes. How do other cities, excuse me, compare to our public hearing, public participation processes? Second, actually, this isn't a question, this is just a note, or maybe it is a question. It is true, we are not eliminating a resident meeting with the developer. That's not the proposal. The proposal is to move it so that it can happen concurrently with staff review, but it's also to offer wider notification of the meeting, is it not?
Well, that's a question. So from what council directed, there would be no change to the wider notification. One of the things that I am presenting to you is we have two different radiuses for citizen participation. None of them match our public hearing requirements. And so that's a question that I propose, but with only the changes to the timing, there doesn't have to be any change to what the notification captures.
I'm sorry, I know that you said that already, and I must have liked that idea so much that I thought we'd ask you to do that. So, and then my final thing is, my memory is that so for example, the community meeting around the project that where Pinball Pete's had to be moved did affect the project. It didn't affect the site plan, but it affected the project. And I would like to know if the change that the proposed change would have affected the outcome. You know, could something like the Pinball Pete's negotiation not have happened in time to facilitate the relocation of, I know that's hard, but then just one more thing is, I remember the Ann Arbor Villages project at Duvarn and Pontiac came in all gas, and it came to Planning Commission with an electric component for the for sale homes. I'd like to understand how that change occurred. Was the resident meeting a factor in that change, or was that primarily a staff negotiated change in response to what staff was told by council that council wanted, and in response to what staff had witnessed Planning Commission asking for? So I think those were 3 questions.
Seem like more than that, but I'll do my best. Yes, to confirm, it's not required by law, the citizen participation ordinance. To that and the next question, I honestly don't I don't have a sense. That's something I can do some research before this comes back to you. I would be very surprised if you would find a lot of other communities that have added the participation ordinance on top of the basic public hearing requirements in their ordinance. But when we get to that, I don't know how many other communities have also gone above and beyond state law to add that to site plan reviews as well. So if that's something you're interested, I can definitely do more of that. As to the question about negotiation, I think that's an interesting example because that negotiation, like you said, doesn't really have any bearing on the technical compliance of the plan, and I think that was one of several sessions that petitioner in that case voluntarily had just chosen to go above and beyond the citizen participation requirements regardless. Maybe there's an argument to be made without that in the first place, they would have never started that conversation. But I think part of that was on like the second or third meeting of that petitioner deciding to keep the neighborhood engaged with that. So to the question about whether or not there would still be time for that to happen, possibly. I mean, it's such a unique circumstance, but in that case, it was probably as much about the community groundswell about, the support for the concern for this institution being potentially gone from our community as much as I think the development review process itself. And then, as for your question about the residential project, I think you're talking about the former landfill site. It's hard. It's hard to determine that, but I will tell you, as part of as part of the brownfield consideration, which City Council considered for that, part of that was helping to offset some of the costs for some of the sustainability features on that development. So, was there advocacy for it? That could have been. It could have occurred at the meeting associated with that. But I think some of the brownfield incentives and probably also had a role in it. I can't sit here and tell you that advocacy for that, and frankly, in that case, the city council's interested in advancing those goals as part of any rezoning of that project. And the discretion, in this case, the discretionary brownfield plan, I would lean towards that having a more of an influence, but I can't say for sure that there weren't many factors.
Got it. Thank you, Councilmember Dish. We're going to go to Commissioner Adams if your comment's still applicable.
Yeah.
Such question.
Yeah, part of what I found compelling about the discussion of this issue in the report that's cited in the 4 economic development resolutions is the idea that we're not getting what we should be getting out of this process requirement, right? We either should be getting better outcomes, which we're not getting generally. There might be exceptions to that, but we're not seeing changes to projects that are arising out of this meeting. And we ought to be getting some kind of public legitimacy in our process and those outcomes that flows from having the meeting and having the notice and having the public feel like they're engaged. And when people show up to a meeting and they feel like they're being heard and then there are no changes to a project, that doesn't feel like notice that advances any particular set of goals that we have as a city. It does feel like notice that is unnecessarily delaying projects by 3 to 4 weeks. So it feels like, and this dovetails a bit into things that Mr. Leonard's going to cover later on. It feels like the value of this is informational, that as we pare back public meeting requirements later on, having this advanced meeting with lots of notice that goes out is a good firewall to prevent the public from feeling like they don't have notice of these changes. If we're going from 15 days or whatever it is of notice under the OMA to 18 hours of notice, if we have this meeting way out in front of it, then I think it's still serving some notice and informational function about projects to the community, and that has value. But that seems to be all it serves. And so we ought to structure it so that it's still happening. But if we're saving a month, and to Mr. Garber's point earlier, if we're saving a month here and a month there and 2 months here, that adds up pretty quickly. And we start actually attacking the problem of the project being bottlenecked in the planning process. I did have a question for Mr. Leonard, though, about it seems like we're cutting email notification out of the the requirement in the ordinance. Am I reading that right? And if I am, what's the logic behind that?
Well, we keep in mind, we don't have an email record of all property owners in the city. So we still rely on assessing mail information. So we're still providing literally mailing addresses to petitioners. We're using those for our notices. I think part of the intention of this direction is actually to go further with digital communication. Maybe it's using our listservs that we have subscribers to. Maybe it's a more dedicated, user-friendly calendar. So my intention is not to decrease the use of email, but I would need to be honest. I can't promise you or anybody else that that is an effective tool that I have for all contacts within a radius anywhere.
But the public shouldn't be reading any intention into that. That if we have, for example, if with the city has a tool where you sign up and I want notice of these meetings,
Yeah.
and we're gonna continue to use that. There's no intention to scrap that, correct?
Yeah. And honestly, what happens now, just this is a little bit of bureaucracy weeds, but like right now, what we do is we might get an email from somebody saying, "Hey, please let me know when this petition is scheduled for a planning commission agenda." We can do one of two things. Right now, what we do is literally we try and save those and we put them in an email list. And then when your packet goes out for that meeting, we also send it to all those people that we've heard that. I just want to be honest, there's a potential for human error there. There's a potential for that to get lost in an Outlook folder somewhere. And so the alternative to that is, hey, make sure you're signing up for planning updates, because that's where we share every agenda. That can also dilute it, right? Because some people, when they're getting all those emails, they're like, oh, tell me when it's something close to me or something like that. So long way of saying no, I don't have any intention to not use those tools, but I want to be honest, we can't rely on those yet until ideally at some point the state might say like, no, you have to provide an email address with your tax bill so we can use it more reliably.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Leonard. We will go to Commissioner Weatherby next, and then Commissioner Mills. Commissioner Weatherby.
So I just have some thoughts. They might be slightly opposing each other. But so I was around doing some of this when this meeting was established. And it was really because people were super frustrated that they'd show up at a public hearing, and really it was a done deal. Like things weren't going to change when they got to a public hearing. Now, that's not 100% true, but there was the idea of let's create this early on meeting so you can actually have a collegial dialogue and we can actually, things can change at that point. I think there are some projects that I've been involved in where that has happened. Hoover and Green near me, 618 South Main, like they added a door on Main Street, and Hoover and Green added some apartments that face the street that they didn't intend to. But I do think generally, even something that's a pre-submittal process for a neighborhood is still really far down the path if you're a project. Like it's not like it's just a idea in somebody's head, like, hey, we're gonna, it's already pretty far down the path. And I think depending on the nature of kind of the opposition or the nature of the support, or that these meetings can get kind of in the weeds really quickly, and it's not that collegial discussion that I think was sort of envisioned early on. I do think sometimes things do change, and I do think that it is an opportunity to introduce a development team to their new neighbors. Whether that is helpful down the road, whether it's worth a month of extra time, I don't know. I think probably really good developers actually do this. To Planner Leonard's comment, I think a really good developers already have these established. They meet multiple times, they get input, they have good discussions. It's already sort of it's already established as part of their process. And so I'm not sure that actually having a random meeting at a random time, and sometimes they really are at random times because there's nothing, it's like a 1 o'clock Thursday meeting it's not going to help people. And so part of me hesitates to remove it because I have seen good things come out of it and discussions that ended up being quite helpful, I think, both for the developers and for the people around them. But I'm not sure. I don't think we can say they're not useful just 100%. But I do think probably it really depends more on the developer and more on what they're hoping to get out of it and the sort of how the various which neighbors show up and how they show up. And that really has more of an effect, and that might happen regardless of whether this meeting is held. Just a few comments. I do, this is probably not the right time, but I do like the removing citizen from the wording. And I actually like community member because that can include people who want to be part of a community who aren't already there. So I like that. And there was one other thing I was going to say, but I will let it go at that.
Gotcha. Thank you. And for the record, I also will second that the change to community member is definitely something that would be helpful to try to be more inclusive. With that, I think Commissioner Mills, I think you had your hand up if it's still relevant, please.
I'm really glad that Commissioner Weatherby went before me and talked about I'm a ball of contradictions, in part because I spend all of my day job trying to figure out how to be fast and fair. So in the climate space. So for just a minute, I'm going to nerd out and read to you something from the National Academy of Sciences, which is called Accelerating Decarbonization in the US. And it's talking about renewables, but I think it is this highlights this tension and unintended consequences. So 2 sentences. Research demonstrates that the character and quality of the process of engaging the public in the context of siting and permitting projects will affect the pace and scale of decarbonization. If permitting reform includes significant reductions in meaningful opportunities for and forms of public engagement, then such reform would create a real risk of slowing rather than hastening the process. So I think there's a tension. The reason that there's a tension right now is because people care about justice, as we should. And we also recognize that to actually just outcomes require building stuff, which can be complicated. And we know the people who often show up and participate are not necessarily representative of the whole community, and certainly not representative of the people who we want to have here. But I think that the long-term consequences that I'm thinking about are if things get right, people are reactionary. And if suddenly things start happening, it's not that long ago that nothing was pretty much making it through. Nothing was getting built here. And so we know kind of how the pendulum swings. And so I think that that's the thing to balance. In my space, what a lot of regulators are saying is we should try to uphold the engagement and cut everything else we can. And so cut out all of the rest of it. In this context though, I think that there's 3 big things that I think are, again, compatible between my day job and what we're doing here. One is that if you're going to have engagement, to the point that Commissioner Adams made, people expect that there to be a change. You need to make sure that even if all it is a venting session, everybody in that room ought to know what's the outcome that we're looking what is the expectation of this? Is it to change the project or is it not? And if you want to actually change a project, we know that we have to have that earlier. And so the idea of this being early, it was the right intention, but I don't actually think it's early enough. And then that's really complicated. And especially for a by right thing like this, there is not an expectation that much would change. You're allowed to build what you're allowed to build. And I think that's different. And some of the things that we've bundled together in type 1 are by right and some of them are not. And I think that that's one of the things that I think is we should be thinking about a little bit. And like, so that's not arguing for the this participation meeting earlier. Like, I actually think it's worse that it comes later because like if there's no decision makers there, they've already turned in their plans. I don't know what purpose that meeting serves other than to let you know that it's happening. And so, and then the other thing, and this is where I'm a ball of contradictions, is there is some value people just want to know. Like, and if there was a bulletin board posted on the place that said, this is what's coming, and this is what the zoning allows, right? Like, I think that people like they don't follow. They don't know the difference between by right and specially and, you know, special exception uses anyway, necessarily. Some people do, and that's awesome, but the average neighbor does not. And so I think like being clear is really important in all of these things. And sometimes those public those community meetings are towards different ends. And so on this one, I don't know how I feel honestly about the changes. In my mind, it's a little bit depends on like what the levers actually are. I don't think that what we have is really working, but I don't think that I think that moving it back is making it even worse, other than to address the time part. But again, I think that there's other things that can address the time part more effectively. So, sorry.
Got it. Thank you. Great comments all throughout, and you are right. There is just a continued tension between the concept of early notice, civic engagement, and also outcomes. So with that, I see Commissioner Norton, Weich, and Dish. So Commissioner Norton.
Yeah, thank you. I want to just echo some things, and Commissioner Adams' point is really good. It's almost worse to put out public engagement that gets ignored than it is to not put out public engagement at all. So it can really backfire. At the same time, I see the benefits of trying to streamline the process. So I have two suggestions, Mr. Leonard, for you to consider. Two other options. One would be to not require a meeting, but to at least require a notice of some kind, just like Commissioner Mills just stated. If you're going to do a project, you should put out some kind of notice like 2 weeks in advance of when you're going to submit your application, just to let folks know what's happening and maybe provide some explanation of what's going on. So that's something to consider. And I got to believe that people that are getting ready to submit applications they're going to be having well-developed stuff and in a place where they could put out a notice 2 weeks before the submission. I don't think that would really hobble their process down. The other thing might be to do what you're proposing. In other words, allow for that public meeting to happen concurrently with staff review, but add to the materials that have to be provided a requirement that the developer indicate to the staff and for the Planning Commission and the City Council later, what activities did you take to work with the neighborhood around your project? Did you reach out to them? Did you hear back from them? How did you reach out to them? How did you respond? So in other words, don't necessarily require that they have that meeting, but put a whole lot of incentive underneath them to do it and try and get them to engage early and meaningfully. And kind of signal that if you've really reached out to your neighborhood, you're gonna get a better project, hopefully, and kind of move the process along, but not make that a strict requirement. For maybe there are times where it just really wouldn't make a difference or wouldn't be necessary. So I'm offering those as two things for you to go back and kind of noodle on with your staff and see if they might be viable. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you. Commissioner Weich.
Thanks. Mr. Leonard, so I was taking notes. So we're in section 528.4, and I have 5 things that I think you are proposing here. So I just wanted, okay, sorry. My Zoom just said something to me, which is my hand is going to be lowered. and it just did. So I wanted to echo that I agree we shouldn't refer to it as citizen, and I'm not sure who mentioned community member, because I think that's a little bit more inclusive because it includes both people who are in the neighborhood, people who live or work or play within the city, or future residents. So I think making sure that we have as broad a signaling in our Unified Development Code for participation, I echo. I made a note that you wanted to make the buffer requirements consistent. So you have 1,000 foot and then you have a 500 foot. And I just wanted to note that the way the UDC is structured, it gives a lot of preference to people who are adjacent to the property while ignoring the impact that the property may have on the whole community. And so as you think about that notice, if we moved away from whatever the structure is today to something that utilizes the planning commission gov alert, I'm in favor of that because it informs more people about what's going on in the city than just the people who are adjacent, because it signals to, by getting a postcard, because Robinson Brothers is going to develop a site near my house. I am actually outside of the cutoff. So when that postcard went out, we did not get it, which is surprising because we got the Valhalla one, which is even further. But I knew about it, obviously, and for planning purposes. And so I participated in the citizen participation Zoom. And I have two sort of reactions here. One is, I think we should be notifying the city as development occurs. And if there's some way for us to simplify that in the UDC so that everyone has a chance to know, hey, this thing is coming, I think that's good. And then my other side is, so I got involved with all this stuff in like 2014 with County Farm Park, which is across the street from my church that I work at and I attend. And I attended all of the meetings from that. From the very first one, I actually brought my interns that were serving with me in that summer in August. And I think we were probably 7 of the 10 participants in that early conversation. And then I attended all the subsequent meetings and spoke in favor of that housing that went in to that development. And I learned something very important, and I don't know that our UDC can do this because I think we're at cross purposes, which is while it's important for me to give feedback about what's being developed, my feedback may not have the outcome that I expect it to have because I don't understand how the development process works, and especially in by right developments. And none of that is covered in the UDC. So if Robinson Brothers is able to get their development to come into the city because it's a township island, they can bring it in under whatever the UDC says it, or the comp plan says it can come in, and then they have a right to build to the extent that the zoning permits. But the citizen participation meeting gives me the impression that I can somehow impact that. And I don't know that the UDC is capable of communicating the limitation of my participation on that development. And that's what I mean by the cross purposes of what the UDC is defining and what my expectations are when I walk into that meeting. And that is really hard. And I don't see anybody in the city taking that on as their responsibility to inform the public. And so whatever changes we make here are going to sort of impact that. And so I don't know if that's a footnote. I don't know if that's something that Commissioner or Council Member Dish wants to take up to City Council, or if there's an on-buds person who wants to, do a video on how development works. But I think that's worth noting in this part of the conversation. And then I think I said I agreed on the digital communication. And then you mentioned something about creating a calendar of meetings on the city website for each development. And I think that that is helpful. And I appreciate Planner Shake's comment that everything is available on the website. But again, the average person has no idea how to find that. And a development that is happening may not have the address that you think it happens or is happening at. So you start to do a search and you can't find any files, even though you know, oh, it's supposed to be 500 South State Street, but they're actually 501 South State Street, and the system is not forgiving. So it's going to say that nothing is there. So this may be outside of the UDC changes, but they may be things that we do on our website to inform our community about how development works, how you can search, and letting them know that we are happy to help them. Like, nobody wants to shut people down or exclude them or ignore them. We just want to inform you. So I'm in favor of all these changes.
Got it. Thank you for that feedback. Really helpful. Councilmember Dish, then we'll go to Commissioner Hammerschmidt. So.
Very quick, because Commissioner White touched on or focused on what I want to say. And I wanted to say that part of the motivation for these changes is because site plan review is an administrative decision. It's not a political decision. And so I think we are in this place where there is a tension between something that looks like a public meeting on an administrative decision, where the public does not know doesn't know how to approve a site plan and may or may not realize that there are things that their opinions about what they would like to see cannot change what this project is. And then the distinction that also Commissioner Mills raised earlier between when it's a by right thing and it accompanies a rezoning. So in practice, it's true that the rezoning is a legislative decision, and it is something that's at the Planning Commission's discretion as well. But those are usually not separated temporally. We often are doing the rezoning and we approve the site plan at the same time. And I think what's broken about that is not that we should have distance between those two things, but that we are doing way too many rezonings on a project by project basis. And so part of the hope of what will come out of the comp plan is a more systematic approach to deciding about zoning. I'm not saying that we could ever eliminate any need for any rezoning ever, but but right now there tend to be very highly charged meetings when the site plan is accompanying a rezoning. And even though you should separate the discussion of the two, people are thinking about whether or not they want you to zone because they know what you're going to put there. And so, we're getting feedback about projects, but it's still the case. Even when there's a rezoning, the site plan itself is still an administrative decision, even though a rezoning hasn't been given. And so I think that this is part of what is making these meetings not productive, because people have an expectation that they can change things that they cannot change. And the project by project rezoning is just not a good way to do planning. And callers say that, and I think they're right. And because we haven't updated the comp plan until now, I haven't known what to do about that other than rezone in a way that isn't the perfect way. But anyway, I just wanted to add that as a reason why this is being recommended to do, because there's a difference between administrative decisions and political ones.
Thank you, Councilmember Dish, and then Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting conversation. I'm not sure, I might just start rambling, so I'm very sorry. I feel like there is a lot of tension, and I feel like there's two different things that we're talking about here, and they're both important. And one is the streamlining project approvals and the timing issue, and then one is the outcomes desired of the meeting itself. And the word that I keep coming back to when thinking about that latter one is performative. I feel like that's what a lot of these, it's checking a box. That's what these meetings I feel like are are serving to accomplish at this point. I mean, I'm sure there are examples of projects where things have been changed, but I think the way that it's set up now, it's not doing that. So if we separate the two and we're just trying to think about like timing of things, I'm totally in favor of this being one tool that we use to try to streamline the development process. This is obviously not the only thing that we should be doing. There are a lot of, as Mr. Garber alluded to, there's, I think, some staff inefficiencies that also need to be addressed, but I'm okay with at minimum pushing the timing of these meetings 15 days. Even like the notice time feels excessive. I think like in this day and age of digital stuff, there's just got to be a better way to like notice people, but then also there's got to be a better way to notice people. And I think both Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Norton alluded to these things, maybe not like exactly, but maybe it's signage on the site, you know, saying like this is coming, this is the zoning. Like, I think that was a great idea. And maybe it is just, instead of a meeting, it's just the postcards that are more like, here's what's happening. It feels like these meetings are really just serving to like answer questions. There's no input given. And I think people do go into these meetings expecting to be able to give input and see the project changed. So in that case, it feels to me that we might as well kind of like blow up this whole process. And it's weird that I'm saying this because I didn't think I would say this, but I think I would be in favor of just like eliminating that meeting requirement because I don't think it's doing anything. And then potentially looking at ways to actually incentivize, as Commissioner Norton was saying, with developers to do engagement. But then the engagement, I think, has to be really early, as Commissioner Mills said, or else it's really not going to make any sort of meaningful difference in the process. I feel like that's all I wanted to maybe say on that. I don't think any of this is helpful. I'm also very torn, but if we're just specifically looking at pushing the timing of the notification of the meeting, like, I think that that's fine. I'm not sure what difference it's going to make in the overall timing of the project because there's the other inefficiencies. And I also like the idea of removing citizen. It's just my final word on that. Thanks.
Gotcha. Thank you, Commissioner Hammerschmidt. And then Councilmember Dish, is there something quick in response to that? Because I think it's oh, got it. Commissioner Abrams, and then we'll go to Dish. So
Thank you. So I think I might be in the minority here, but I feel pretty acutely uncomfortable. Like if I zoom out for a moment and I think, okay, we want to shorten this timeline that we think is bloated. It's a 24-month process or right. It's a year and a half long process to get a petition through the city. And the first thing we're going to go for is this 3 weeks that we think is being caused by asking members of our community to weigh in on a project. So whether that's irrational or I'm too hung up on the optics, I'm not sure, but there's something about that feels difficult for me to support without having a bigger picture of what are all the things we're going to do and what are the ways that everybody is going to kind of like meet in the middle to make this process one which is both efficient and equitable. And I think you all know that I want more development. I want more housing. I want to encourage that as best as we can as a community. But I do think, and I don't disagree that the process might be not working the way it is, but it feels hard for me to say that, oh, well, then the best solution is to just eliminate it, as opposed to saying, well, how could we have a better community engagement process? Is that even something we can entertain? It feels so cynical to think, oh, nope, we're just going to eliminate it. And there's small things, but I do think there are changes that come to these projects. So I think Julie mentioned a couple examples, a door here, but I think the other thing that I think often comes up in these meetings are like crosswalks or bus stops or just like granular information about what's happening on that site that a developer may not be aware of that neighbors really are. Cut-throughs, connections to adjacent lots, whatever it is. So I'm reluctant to, and so maybe we can move on and we can think about this in a broader set of things that we're thinking about changing as opposed to this being the one thing. But right now, standing out there as the one thing, it makes me pretty uncomfortable. And I think it's sending a message that I don't. Yeah, it's somehow, yeah, I think it's sending a message that I'm not really in support of. So I know that all of that is in tension with the reality of the bureaucracy and the outcomes. And so I mean, to Commissioner Hammerschmidt's point about doing something that's simply performative or symbolic that doesn't have meaningful outcomes, I'm not advocating for that either. But I would like to hold on for a moment to the possibility that we could think about something that could make this process better as opposed to just eliminating it, or that we at least present this as a kind of part of a suite of things where like everybody's doing something. Petitioners are giving a bit, the community is giving a bit, staff is giving a bit, we're giving a bit, and together we're going to make the process better. So that's all. Thanks.
Gotcha. Thank you, Commissioner Aprons. And Mr. Leonard, I wanted to interject with this one thing before we go to you. One of the things that I was just thinking of is that, like, what is real estate development, right? I just gave this lecture last week on this, and it's a constant reconfiguration of the built environment to respond to society's needs. So, like, a part of me thinks that, like, a good developer is talking to the citizens anyways, right? The question would be, you know, what rules are in place. And so for me, I'm actually, Commissioner Abrams, I'm actually with you on that. It does feel somewhat uncomfortable for me as well. I understand that there is the difference between an administrative body, right? Where if it's something by right, we have already agreed that these are the rules. If you're within the rules, it should just move forward, right? We can't deny it on that basis. But at the same time, if like it's really kind of talking about checks and balances and an outlet like for the public to be able to give input, and so to me that process does seem important. And so I think a lot of people have talked about that tension, but you know, when you are responding, like almost as a developer, you really want to be a steward, right? Of saying, hey, we are going to be responding to what we believe that the city needs. And so just wanted to kind of throw that out there, but I do appreciate everyone's feedback so far. And we'll go to Mr. Leonard and then Commissioner Weatherby.
I wanted to wrap up sort of a couple themes that I am thinking about from this discussion. So if Commissioner Weatherby wants to add anything with the commission's acquiescence, maybe she could address, and then I'll wrap up, and then I'd still like to get your feedback on some of the other topics as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Commissioner Weatherby, and then we'll go back to Mr. Leonard, for the wrap up.
So I just had a quick thought. There is a Facebook and Instagram page called Developing Ann Arbor. I don't know who's looked at it. I don't know who's doing it. But something like that, I was thinking could be sort of helpful, where it's just like, here's a development that's coming. Here's where it is. Here's a couple slides on it. This is a by right project, and there will be no citizen meeting. This one has a citizen meeting because it's this, you know, like a very quick kind of synopsis of projects and where they are and what, you know, this one meets all the city regulations and will presumably pass forward, or have just like a little blurb right now, like, you know, saying to someone, well, you can go into Stream and find projects, is not really what most people are going to do or know how to do or want to do. And so I was thinking something like that, where just a really quick, that might be something kind of down the road, that, you know, this one is a citizen meeting or a community meeting at this time. It's a lot of overhead to set up, but I think long-term could be not that much overhead for something. Anyway, it's just a thought.
Got it. Thank you, Commissioner Weatherby. And Mr. Leonard, I will just say that I actually really liked Commissioner Norton's recommendation about the concept of putting in there, hey, talk about how you engage you know, when you're going through a site plan, even on a by right basis. Tell us about how you did engage the community, et cetera. Just so, but not necessarily make it a requirement. Again, this is an administrative function we're at, but make it a value set essentially. So, but yeah, but if you can, obviously we've had a lot of really great feedback. If you wanted to give us kind of concluding thoughts on the salient elements. Thanks.
So, thank you for the discussion. A lot of, I think, I enjoyed it, and I think a lot of great perspectives. So I just want to reflect back a couple things that you have me thinking about that could manifest in something that I come back to you with. One, I want to be clear, the council has directed us to do something in this regard, so that's sort of underlying this. There's I think there was a couple comments about this seems like the optics of it, or why are we focusing on this? Just to take a step back, this represents 2 of 13 recommendations from one of the 4 resolutions adopted by the city council. So by no means is this the only thing. This is the first thing that we started approaching. Some of the other things, for example, the reason I approached some of these initially is, frankly, they're more independent to you and planning and process. A lot of the other things are going to incorporate a lot of other stakeholders across the organization, utility providers, utility capacity, how we are paying for utilities and the like. So, I want to recognize, I understand it's maybe not feel warm and fuzzy to be starting with this, but this is just, again, 2 of 13 recommendations on one of the 4 resolutions. One of the things that I am hearing through this conversation is there might still be a place for our type 1 and type 2 projects, but they might not be correctly attributed right now. It might make more sense for those to start following more of a by right versus a more discretionary process. So that could be a piece of this. And I think corresponding with that is maybe also some bifurcating when meetings happening might be for more discretionary projects, whereas notice is emphasized more for more by right projects. Not casting aside a lot of opportunity to educate the public on a project by project basis, a more broad basis, but that's something that it's sort of spinning in my head from this conversation a little bit. And then, one of the things I introduced was the notion of shifting the radiuses, and I think I am interested in that, and I think there's a lot of emphasis about communicating with the entirety of the community. And so I honestly am hearing a lot less concern about whether it's 300, 500, or 1,000 feet. I'm hearing more concern to make sure that we are providing a wide opportunity for people to understand what's happening either in proximity to them or elsewhere in the city. So I think I am going to consider some consolidation of that notice requirement with the emphasis of a more broad digital website communication, what have you, going forward. So those are some of the takeaways that I'm hearing. Obviously, thank you for everything, and you'll get another swing at that. So the next recommendation is hearings before the design review board shall no longer be required by ordinance, and a review of the design review standards for each project will become a city planning staff function. So this initial recommendation has actually been presented to the design review board, and I want to be clear that they, to my understanding, are not supportive of that elimination whatsoever. I think they have communicated that they do add value to the design of projects. When the design review guidelines were established, they were really established very deliberately as strictly advisory only. Going back to that by right discussion, is the city can implement architectural standards, but they have to be measurable. And so I think rather than having every building have to have a brick that is in these tones, or every building having to have whatever projections, I think it was an intention to provide some guardrails where people could voluntarily work within and present projects, get feedback, and potentially evolve those projects. To be clear, compliance with those guidelines has no bearing on the technical requirements of a site plan or not. It could have a bearing on a discretionary approval. Just as an advisory and as a factor in that, as directed by city council, that intention is to say that planning staff should be responsible for assessing a project against the design review standards, communicating that with the planning commission or city council, but we have to continue to do that in a way that acknowledges that it is not a yes or no factor in whether or not that site plan meets the technical requirements of the ordinance or not. We do have some requirements in our downtown zoning, for example, street wall heights and setbacks and the like, but the design guidelines are voluntary. They are not binding on that. So one approach, I think very faithful to the direction of the city council resolution, would be just that: eliminate the design review board. And what would happen is Julia or Mariana, as part of their review of a project, would be presenting you the technical requirements of a site plan. And it would also be accompanied by a memo that articulates how it does or doesn't meet the design guidelines of the city. Going above and beyond that, my question to the Planning Commission is, should we continue that process or eliminate it altogether? That is, eliminate the design guidelines altogether. I don't want to refute that projects probably have improved through the design review process, but at the same time, I will tell you, one of the things that I have never heard in my time since coming to the city in 2016 is how much people love the architecture of our downtown buildings. And so I think it sort of falls in that same category of, is it reaching our intended purpose? So feedback for you is, should we eliminate the design review board? Again, present this, go through the same process as part of that, but it would be done on a staff level. Or again, towards efficiency. Right now, one more thing, the design review board process has to happen currently under our code, not only before application, but also before the citizen participation requirement. And so this is another process that's starting to stack up time as well. So I'll shut up and await your feedback.
Gotcha. And Mr. Leonard, just for the purpose of clarification, we are going to be going over 5 or 4 main changes. Is that right? And we're on number 2?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to look to try to cap this one to like 8:35, no later than. So we'll go to Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, I'll make my comment quick. I don't support eliminating design review, and I think the reason for that, going back to, again, the legislative mandate that we're operating under here, there's some aspects of the execution that I think are within our discretion to work through. But here, first of all, the requirement to eliminate design review board, I think that's pretty clear from the resolution. And to shift that over to staff, again, that's directed by the resolution. The other thing that's directed by at least one of the 4 resolutions is that City Council adopted the findings of fact in that report. And one of those findings is that design review has value. And that's based on staff, that's based on the administrator's input, that's based on, a lot of staff experience, and I'm disinclined to, contravene. So it feels like I don't support your question, Mr. Leonard. I don't support that.
Thank you, Commissioner Weich.
At first, I didn't understand what Commissioner Adams was saying, but I did towards the end, because I agree. I was going to ask, whose purview is this? If this is coming from council already, then I don't understand why we're discussing it. We just remove it because they're the entity that created the board and they want to eliminate it. And I think the only reason why it's coming to us is because we have the purview of the UDC. And so we have to concur with council. No, we do not have to concur, because they can do what they want when it gets to their table. So again, I think I'm just going to say I agree with Commissioner Adams that yes, if council wants to delete a board that it created, it's in their prerogative to do so, and I'm not going to stand in their way.
Can I just clarify? Commissioner Adams, you said the answer to my question is no. You would recommend a very literal and faithful reading of the council direction, not to eliminate the design guidelines, but rather fold it into the planning staff review. And you're okay with that, Commissioner Weich?
You got it.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I just got the COVID booster and I'm a mess over here. So if the words are coming out of my mouth wrong, that's why.
Stay healthy.
I hope you're feeling better. Any other commissioners with thoughts on the design review board? I'll add my 2 cents as to actually when I've seen the design review board make a positive change. For example, this is really with respect to Vic South. That's the new development that's currently going up. I think it might be done, but it's on the corner of East University and Southview. I was at the design review board where it was supposed to be this just kind of like, again, uniform, supposed to mirror Vic North in terms of materials, et cetera. But there was a very intentional request to create kind of a visual plaza. As you went through the archway, they wanted the future students to be able to feel like they had a sense of arrival and there was a legibility of the built environment as they walked through the archway towards South University. And so they changed the material on that. I think it's like limestone. It has a little bit more of a visual, I think, appeal as you walk up to it. But I mean, the appeal might be subjective in nature too. But that is, I think, a concrete, no pun intended, on the limestone, but it was a concrete example of how design review board helped to improve, or at least to some, folks, idea of improvement of design, but we're had a measurable outcome difference in it. So, I can't necessarily refute, council's literal directions, but I can kind of recount a time where a table and a board of architects whose job is to respond to the changing aesthetics of, what we understand as good design, and even not enforceable, their contributions and feedback is still valuable to a developer. Now, they can certainly reject it, but there are times I have seen where it's made outcomes different. And I also think that the design review board is very specific to the DDA. Is that correct? I think it's DDA projects are subject to design review board.
Projects in the D1 or D2 district that are also not in a historic district.
Okay, got it. Thank you for the clarification. So, I again, I cannot refute, council's direction. If they want to remove a board that they created, okay. It's our mandate. We serve at the, but I guess from a planning commissioner's position, having seen an improvement of a building design, and I think a panel of architects who are specifically designed around aesthetics, materiality, color selections, things of that nature. I mean, I still also defer to my architects, even though I have an idea of what looks good, but they're people who study this professionally. So I see the value of it. I just wanted to voice that, but cannot refute, obviously, council's literal directions. So that's my feedback. Any other commissioners wanted to weigh on this particular topic? If not, Mr. Leonard, do you think you kind of got what you need from us?
I do. Thank you.
I have a little bit of resistance against that. That's basically kind of what I'm saying.
So just to clarify too, I think you had talked about how many more we had. 4 total. Now we're through 2. We got 2 more to go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Next up is elimination of the public hearing requirement for site plans at the Planning Commission. However, Planning Commission meetings should be restructured to allow public comment for each site plan that appears on the agenda. So just to set the stage a little bit, state law does not require public hearings for site plans because it is an administrative function. It is akin to a building permit. If you submit a building permit and it meets the building code, I don't have the ability to say, oh, I know you meet all the regulations, but I'm not going to issue this for some discretionary reason. Site plan is no different. If it meets the technical requirements of the code, it shall be approved. So this direction is sort of goes at the fact that even though historically we have added a public hearing to our site plans at Planning Commission, that is not required by law. One of the sort of impacts of that is that it creates a pretty long lead time to get on an agenda. Because public hearings have to be noticed, both published in our newspaper of record as well as sent out to adjacent property owners. That basically means about 3.5 weeks prior to the Planning Commission, we have to be making a decision whether or not to put a site plan onto that agenda for you. By eliminating the public hearing requirement, one, I think it goes a little bit towards this tension that we talked about with citizen participation, is being honest and upfront about what the opportunities are to influence a project and what they aren't. 2, it gives projects more ability, petitioners with staff, to make closer decisions to the commenter. Yes, it is possible that you as the Planning Commission could choose to add a site plan to your agenda because there would be no barrier of notice prior to that happening. I don't think that would likely happen very often because we're going to be you're going to be asking us for does it meet the requirements or not, technical requirements, but it is possible. So that is the specific the direction by the city council. And you'll see that that gets referenced in a lot of different sections of the UDC, where other sections of the UDC might say after a public hearing of a site plan by the planning commission. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of the amendments. The additional questions that I would pose to the planning commission for feedback is, should we also consider the same to the city council? The city council is making the same administrative decision that either the planning commission or the planning manager is about the technical compliance of a site plan. And so that is one, to be clear and transparent, that is above the direction of the resolution, but I pose it for consistency and whether it's appropriate. We also have specific public hearing requirements for wetland use permits. We don't get a lot of them, but when we have a site plan that also involves a wetland use permit, there you will often see 2 public hearings at the city council when it's going there. So this would be eliminating the public hearing requirement for that as well. And then I'll stop there maybe before I add some additional notice about if we go in and make these modifications to the PUD ordinance, I want to introduce another potential change for who can apply for a PUD. So, but I'll stop here for the public hearing. I don't know if you have any questions before you start discussion. Happy to hear it.
Well, I think we'll go straight to Commissioner Abrams and Commissioner Mills.
Thank you. I think I'm wondering whether there is the possibility of a middle ground. So I'm wondering what's driving for clarification or confirmation, if we did this, the public wouldn't know what's on the agenda. At the earliest, they would know the Friday before the Tuesday meeting. And it's possible that they wouldn't know until the meeting because something could be added at any time between Friday and Tuesday, and we could have an amended agenda. So in order to plan to review the item and to know that they can show up, et cetera, they would only ever have at a maximum Friday to Tuesday. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It would be if there's no notice requirement, they might receive the same email that you do Thursday or Friday before the meeting.
And the public hearing requirement you're saying is 3.5-ish weeks, but that's not the amount of time that the public. What is the amount of time the public has now between when the public hearing is noticed and the meeting? It's 2 weeks, I guess.
Yeah,
because sometimes it's on our agenda for a meeting that's 2 weeks later.
So they're still only getting the agenda at that same time frame, but prior to that, they might be reading the Washtenaw Legal News 2.5 weeks in advance to see what public hearings are being scheduled before various city public bodies, or they're receiving the postcard notification sometime between the city mailing it out 15 days and when the Postal Service delivers that postcard to their home.
But also at our prior meeting, we say, what are the public hearings on the next meeting's agenda? And nothing can be added after that. So there's always that at least that 2 week period. So I think my question is there any possibility for something that is greater than 3 days and less than 2 weeks? Because I think Friday to Tuesday, again, if we could say that the system isn't working, but I don't want to just jump to the solution being, well, then let's just get rid of it. I think I'd like to try to ideate a better solution. And I think giving the public time to look at what it is and clear their calendars and make arrangements for childcare, whatever it is people have to do in their lives to be able to attend to these things. I think the public comment is a very important part of the process, whether it's technically a public hearing or we call it public comment, but the public input, I think, is an important part of the process. So that would be my question. It's kind of hanging out there. I don't expect you to be able to answer it now, but.
Well, the short answer is yes. There is no state law requirement for public hearings associated with site plan. I think we could construct anything desired. Right now, because we have flagged that as an application that requires a public hearing, we do define public hearing is a very specific term. It means we are noticing it in the paper, we're noticing in advance. So to your first question, yes, you could construct anything desired. You could choose to only notice it in the paper, but not send out postcards. You could do whatever you want. I think the question though is just to go, like you were talking about public comment being very important. Just this has been a thread of our conversation. These are not discretionary approvals. These are technical compliance with our standards. And so when we're talking about public hearings for site plans, public comment on an administrative process. And that's
Sorry,
why
you're talking only about by right? Aren't we also talking about PUDs and special
We're not talking-
exception and?
no, special exceptions, rezonings, PUD zonings, all would continue to require public hearings because those are mandated by state law. This would only be for site plans.
Which means by right.
Yes.
I mean, don't PUDs have site plans? I think that's why I'm confused.
Well, they do, but they're also by right. So a PUD zoning district drafts a zoning district, and then the PUD site plan is a by right site plan consistent with that zoning
Within
district.
that PUD. Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me mull that over for a moment. I'll turn it over to Commissioner Mills, who I think's on deck.
Sounds good, Commissioner Mills?
It is a lovely segue because my question was like, if we're only talking about site plans for new commissioners, reminders, that's not a right word. I'm not using that word right. We eliminated a lot of things. Like we moved things down the level of like what has to go to planning, what has to go to council, what comes to planning commission, and what stays with staff. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I can't remember. I'm curious how many site plans we still have for council approval, and like get one, and the idea that they would go through 2 levels when they are by right. Maybe this seems like a great opportunity to, it's not Zoroing it, it's like writing it. Because to that point, if this suggests to me, if we cut out the public hearing or like cut comments specifically associated with it, I do think that sometimes we ask, where are your bike hoops? Yes, it's by right, but like, well, that was not by right, but there could be a by right thing. And we do ask, are your bike hoops actually usable? But a lot of the things that we ask about or pick up on are as a result of public comment. And I don't want to cut that part of the process out because I think it's helpful for us. If we're going to decide on a development proposal, then I would like the benefit of public comment. If we're not gonna like, but if we really don't have any discretion either, like, I don't know. I'm just feeling like we need to right size it. And if it's before us, I would prefer that we have public comment personally. But I guess I understand also that if there's limited discretion in what we can do, and we know this, right, then maybe this should just be part of the public ethos that like the by right things that shall be approved are approved.
Thank you. We'll go to Commissioner Norton, Adams, then Weich. Thanks.
Thank you. I think the better way to think about this is not by right versus something else. Site plan approval is really more properly thought of as an enforcement mechanism. It's the last chance the planning staff or the decision maker has to confirm that the project is complying with all of the requirements of the zoning code. That's why it's administrative. Are they doing what they have to do under the ordinance? And so in the sense of, we don't want to create a false sense that the community has an ability to change a project when they don't. Having a public hearing and making it seem like a discretionary decision where there's a lot of flux is misleading. And then you get people that are really unhappy because they thought they could change the project and they can't. So that really cuts in the direction of doing exactly this, dropping the public hearing requirement for site plan approval because they're administrative, and doing it both for planning committee. It doesn't matter who the decision maker is. It's still an administrative decision. You have to approve it if it complies. So I would drop it from the city council action too, because the city council is acting as an administrator in that case. Having said that, I suspect, I haven't been on the planning commission that long, but there's always some flux. And interpreting the requirements and making a judgment on did they satisfy the requirement or not. And so there's a little bit of wiggle room there. And there's some benefit to having the public reviewing and commenting on the staff to make sure that they're faithfully evaluating the project and deciding whether or not it's complying. So I can see the benefit of having a public comment period, maybe notice 2 weeks out and let folks know you can come and comment on this project. You should know it's an administrative process. If they've complied, it has to get approved, but you're welcome to comment on it and try to do a better job of managing the public's expectations about what kind of input they could have. So I would go along with dropping the public hearing requirements for site plan approval, the enforcement mechanism, both by planning commission and city council. But then, because it's not required in state law, we're perfectly open to having a public comment notice period and maybe make that 2 weeks out before site plan gets approved, just to give folks a chance to review it and come and make comments. And then put a lot of public education into that process. Let folks know this is an administrative decision. You're limited. We're limited on what we can do here because if they've complied, we have to approve the project. So that would be my recommendation on how to address all this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, I share Commissioner Norton's view. I think to Mr. Leonard, to your question, I would support the elimination of the public hearing requirement at both council and planning. And I think part of that is my personal view is that these rules were not created with the level, like I don't want to apply more scrutiny to the paring back of these rules in the middle of the housing crisis than council and planning applied to the creation of the rules in the first place. And a lot of these rules were just reflexive reactions to the perception of we don't want apartments here, we don't want density here, and we don't want minorities here. And that's not, there wasn't a lot of care or thought that went into that. It was just, let's make it harder, let's make it longer, and here's how you do it. That's a pretty simple button to press administratively. My perception, again, after reading the report that's cited in these resolutions, is that our planning process is just bloated and it's got to get cut back. So if we can cut this back, again, we're retaining the citizen participation meeting. We're not required to do that. There's other forms of notice that we do at the city level that are giving people, especially neighbors nearby, lots of advance notice on projects. This feels like something we can cut, and I think we should cut it, or else, we're not reacting appropriately to a housing crisis.
Thank you. Commissioner White.
Thank you again, Commissioner Adams. I was going to say some things in the same vein, which is when we read the book, The Color Law, we see that Truman wanted to enforce segregation, but do it in what was called a race neutral way. And the Planning Commission was the result of that attempt. And it has done its job. And it's done its job very, very well. I think we can just look at the outcomes of the African-American population in our city that were presented to us by the Comprehensive Planning Subcommittee when we had those meetings, to see how effective it is in blocking things, and especially, as Commissioner Adams noted, apartments or density. And I have said this at the planning table, and I will say this every opportunity that I get. Our UDC is very much structured in a way that opposes density. And we are, as a city, looking at the impact of what that has meant with our land use, and we are trying to remedy that. So as this kind of activity, these public hearings on administrative site plans, delay these development opportunities from happening in our city, I concur that they should be removed. I also want to echo what Commissioner Norton said around maybe on our side as a remedy here, the Planning Commission could do at least 1 or 2 additional things. One, note that the public hearings for administrative site plans are being replaced with public comment. So to continue the structure in our agenda, to note that we're going to have something that is administrative and there will be public comment for it. And at the time that we note that, we also inform the public, we may add something to the agenda all the way up to the requirements that the Open Meetings Act allow, which is up to 2 hours before the meeting. So please pay attention to the agenda or subscribe to the Gov alert for the planning so that you can get a notice. And if we do add something, I would ask that staff add it to the Gov notes so that it gets noticed, so that people who won't know to tune in can tune in. And then I think when we get to the administrative site plan approval process, that we remind the public that this is an administrative site plan approval. Again, in the vein that Commissioner Norton said, this is our last opportunity to ensure that it conforms. And I think, was it Mills or Weatherby has already stated that we do get things from the public, and bike hoops are one of those things, and developers respond to that feedback from us at the table. And we often get public comments that commissioners then give to developers to get answers. And I know that changing it this way doesn't ensure that future bodies act in the way that this current body does, but it is my hope and goal, or I guess desire, that we would see that be consistent going forward. But I think as a tool that this has been used to slow down development, it has been very, very effective. And I'll close with this. One of my very first meetings, or like in the first 6 months of being here, I was quite surprised by the type, tenor, and content of the public comments that we heard on by right developments. So much so that I actually took to social media afterwards to share my surprise that my neighbors would get up, share their names, where they live, and effectively say they didn't want people like me to live in our community. That was quite surprising to me. And so where we have these opportunities to remedy these harms that have been systematically added to our system and our structure, I think we should take them.
Thank you. Commissioner Hammerschmidt?
Thank you. I'm tired, so I just want to make sure that I understand the difference between public hearing and public comment. It's in the noticing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so public hearings have very specific and prescribed noticing, both publication and mailings of a buffer. Public comment has no such articulated requirements. So I think this is what I think maybe Commissioner Abrams was getting at, is that maybe that's something we want to define. Maybe we won't put a site plan on an agenda unless it's been announced at the agenda prior, but maybe that is the extent of notice for a public comment. So, but yes, you're right. Public hearing means very specific timing and methods of notification. Public comment currently has no prescribed method of notification or publication.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I just want to make sure. And I agree with basically everything that's been said before me. I feel like we've heard a lot of times during public hearings for by right site plans, urges for us to decline a project for XYZ reasons that we can't do because it meets code, and then like our code would need to be changed. So I think eliminating this requirement, but at the same time, as Commissioner White was saying, like making it clear why like this is something that's approved by like this, we don't need the hearings. I think it's sort of that education component. Like, we're not just being jerks and like not letting you speak. It's like, I also like I find value in quite a bit of the public comment, things that we can suggest to developers. And I think that some developers like take our suggestions, even if they don't have to do them, if things like bike hoops. So I like to hear it, but I think just removing that noticing component and any of the time that adds on to projects again is a perfectly appropriate thing to do in this case. Thanks.
Thank you. And we'll hit these last three just in the interest of time, because I think we still have one other item left. We'll move on by 8:50. So Commissioner Abrams, Dish, and then Mills. Thanks.
Yeah, quickly, I'll just say, I generally agree with the tenor of these comments around the obstacle that the public hearing produces and the desire to eliminate that. I think I am invested in the time, the time of notification, not official noticing, but just, you know, Friday to Tuesday feels unrealistic to me. It feels like, then we may as well just not have public comment. I don't know, or something like that. Like if we actually want people to be able to have a chance to come, we need to give them a little bit more notice. I don't think it needs to be 2 weeks. I think it can be less. But I also just wanted to say that I do find that I think there's value in the public comment, even if it isn't directly impacting that project. So if I think about the years-long dialogue we have had with Mr. Garber, at public hearing after public hearing after public hearing, there is value in that. And I think there are other instances of that where, as a body, we start to have a long arc conversation around an issue that comes to our attention, or we learn about it through that opportunity. And so just taking that example, if Mr. Garber never could come because he didn't have time to do the calculations or prepare the comments, I think that would be we would really miss out. So whatever the process is that we come to, I want it to be one which is robust enough that it allows for people who, you know, not everybody who's commenting is anti-development or NIMBY. I mean, I think we have some people who come regularly and comment and are very supportive, and in fact challenge us to do more and to build more dense. So, but I also understand the history and the obstacle that the public hearing produces. And one more thing, just want to underscore, I also agree with Commissioner Norton and Hammerschmidt about the kind of public education component. I think that's really, really important. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Dish, then Mills.
The thing that I have not fully understood about this proposal is whether there would be public comment attached to the site plan consideration on the agenda, or whether we're just saying to people, you can come to general public comment and speak at the outset of the meeting. And that is my question.
I read it to be direction from the council that it should be restructured to allow public comment for each site plan that appears. So I read that as an intention that there are windows of comment opportunity in the same number that they are now. They would not be bound by the same advance notice requirements that impact timing for that consideration.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Mills.
That was my question, and I'll just add on understanding how or if there is change to, I think it's in our bylaws about how our meetings operate and the order of operation. And actually, I think there could be a great benefit in rearranging things so that during our new business, it's not a mix of things that are site plans and by right, and so that things that have public hearings are separate. Like, I think that goes a long ways towards the public education opportunity for people to understand what is the level of discretion. So I just don't know if it requires some changes in our bylaws, particularly if we want to codify the sort of thing that Commissioner Abrams suggested in terms of even if it's not a public hearing, the timing, what our expectation is in terms of putting something on the agenda. I think that would go a long way towards making it clear kind of what we're imagining.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Do you think you have enough feedback on that particular topic? Great. And let's hit the last one before we go to public comment.
Well, I'd like to do I'd like to do 2 rapid fire if we can.
Okay. Yeah.
One, there's just a note that I've added here. It's not specifically relevant to the public hearing requirement for site plans, but right now for a plan unit development, we require that all ownership is required to apply for a plan unit development. And I think that makes a lot of sense for the establishment of a plan unit development. However, I think it can be quite limiting once a plan unit development is established. An example of this is say that I'm a petitioner and I come in and I have one property and I would like to apply for a PUD. I satisfy that requirement. I come to the city, I get a PUD, and then I build 100 condominiums on that property. And then under our current code right now, the only way that any modification, like say that somebody wants to modify some of the regulations, maybe they want to change a setback, maybe they want to allow more housing. The only way that that can happen right now is, again, if all of the people with a property interest in that plan unit development district authorize the application. I think that is a pretty high burden for amendments or modifications to a plan unit development. I think the who of the ownership should definitely be a factor in it, but I think that I would be interested, and I'm just curious for maybe like some quick response. Would the planning commission be interested in seeing language that would provide perhaps a lower standard for modification to a PUD that considers the factors of who is participating, as opposed to potentially, in that case, 99 people could be on board with some change. One person could effectively prevent the remaining 99 people from applying for amendment to that PUD because all owners have to participate. Is that something that you would be open to seeing, some sort of language that differentiates between an initial and an amendment to a PUD in that regard?
I can probably, is this coming from like maybe the DT, the Ashley News, when they came for a PUD amendment of their apartment?
Yes,
specific?
It's come up in a couple of cases. Like we've had, there's a PUD that used to exist on Plymouth, that it was a mixed use with commercial and apartments above, and it had an outlot bank, and the bank was permitted only for financial institutions. We kept receiving different, like a veterinary office, I think, was looking at it, maybe a child care center. I don't remember all the details, but all of the owners of that site were not interested in anything but a bank there for whatever reason. And so that basically negated the ability to modify that. I think that should be a factor, but it's sort of, I think that decision at that point should be in the legislative hands of the city as opposed to maybe neighbor by neighbor.
Gotcha.
Maybe I'm not explaining this well, and maybe it's like a rapid fire thing.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I need a little more time to think about it because like the PUD, plan unit development agreement, is an agreement between the parties. And so, and while I agree that there should be some kind of practicality or like commercially reasonable standards of like what are other people, competent, reasonable people in this other scenario would do. I also have, from like a contract standpoint, I don't know. It just seems kind of weird that one party could unilaterally impose, certain kinds of changes to a PUD when they are a party technically to the PUD. And so, I mean, and unless like the PUD itself had some kind of a majority or practicality or supermajority standing. So I that's just like my gut reaction. I hear you on kind of like the commercially reasonable component of it, but I probably need to just give it a little more thought before I gave it. But that being said, we have Councilmember Dish and Commissioner Norton. And we have Commissioner Norton.
Brett, can I make one question and then make a comment? The question is, under our zoning code, can anybody request rezoning a parcel of land in the city, or can it only be the parcel owner who makes a rezoning request?
Parcel owner, or the city can always initiate a rezoning, but apart from that, only the parcel owner.
Only the parcel owner can. Under the terms of the code. That's not an MZA requirement, right? That's just our code requirement.
I think that's just our code requirement.
So it seems to me that if I'm reading so PUDs have always been a really confusing aspect of the MZEA. And if I read the city zoning code correct, it's turned it into a two-step process. The first step is rezone the property. That's a legislative function. Once it's rezoned, then you approve the site plan. That's the administrative function.
Yeah.
So once you create the PUD, it's just like a legislative function. You've changed it. It would seem to me that anybody who's got a property interest in the PUD could request to change the zoning again, to rezone it, which is effectively what modifying the PUD would be, right? it would
Yeah, but it
require
cuts-
action by city council to change the PUD legislatively.
Requires city council approval, yeah, for sure. But I think to Commissioner's Lee cuts both ways. On one hand, you might not want one party to be able to have the influence to be able to modify conditions that are going to apply broadly to the PUD district. On the flip side, do you want one person to prevent somebody from being able to seek that? So it's a bit of a
So
balance.
my take on it would be, you're not allowing one person to change the PUD. You're allowing one person to ask the city council to change the PUD, and they could decide they don't want to do it because they're hearing enough opposition to it.
100%.
But the other side is you can let one person completely veto a change and so they've completely gummed up the property. I would say change it to, so that anyone with a property interest can request a change to the PUD and then let it be the legislative function that it's gonna be. And that would be my recommendation. I don't see getting one property owning interest, the ability to veto anything that's different from what they want. I mean, that's down the line of, we don't like change and I'm not gonna do anything that will allow that to happen. So I would very much be in favor of, let's get rid of that.
That's more background if that is accompanying the changes that come with the other things. So, thank you. The last proposed change is amend the city ordinance to eliminate land division notifications. So again, this is a creation of the city. There's no state requirements that when you are conducting a land division that you have to notify property owners within 300 feet. Our code says that when you are doing a land division that is creating a new lot, which is, I want to clear, it's distinct from an administrative land transfer. So if you're moving a property boundary, that does not require. If you're consolidating lots, that doesn't require. But if you are creating an additional lot through land division, our standard is, does it meet the requirements of the state land division requirements? Does it meet, part of that directs us to, does it meet the requirements of our code? That is, does it meet the lot size? Does it meet the lot width, et cetera? If the answer to those two things is yes, the land division is approved. Again, I don't have the ability to say, yeah, it meets all of the requirements, but I don't like this, so I'm not going to approve it. In our case, we go through that review, and then our code says, however, the city cannot approve that land division until a minimum of Mariana or Julia will help me, 14 or 15 days after we have sent notice to all property owners within 300 feet of the land division. I have a lot of conversations with people who are frustrated by that. And it's a lot of time communicating to them that the intention of this is to notify you, but I don't have discretion once it gets to this point to deny the land division. So the proposed direction from City Council would be to eliminate those notifications from the process.
Commissioner Norton.
So in the spirit of where we're heading with all of this, I would be in favor of that. If we think that giving people notice and the ability to object is meaningful, then don't let it be an administrative, you don't have it be an administrative decision. If it's an administrative decision and you've checked the boxes and they've satisfied all the requirements, there's no reason to have a public notice requirement and add that as another stick in the mud. So I would be in favor of that. Unless I'm missing something, somebody else.
No, I think that makes sense to me as well. It's just kind of futility, or at a certain point. So, any other commissioners with thoughts on that particular one about the elimination of land division notifications or the public notice requirement? Seems like that's Mr. Leonard, do you think you got valuable feedback just with respect to these changes and covered the stuff you wanted to?
Thank you. I just really appreciate the conversation. I know that these are significant. I really appreciate the dialogue. I know that it's apparent that you are all thinking very deeply about these things. And so I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to sort of sound through it. Next will be me doing my best to sort of hopefully make you all happy with the proposed language that will be presented to you in a more formal fashion next for actual public hearing and consideration.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Commissioner White, I think you'll have the last word before we go to public comment.
I don't want to necessarily have the last word because it's asking Mr. Leonard if I misread his memo. I thought you had changes for section 529 on area plants.
That's part of the public hearing notice as well.
Okay, great. then I have nothing else to say.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Thank you all for a great conversation and discussion regarding this. And then with that, we're going to move on to actually section number 4, which is communications to Planning Commission.
One was added, so I think Ms. Alexander sent out a revised agenda. So
oh, got it. Sorry, I must be on the. Which will take us to section number 5, which is public comment. So persons may speak for 3 minutes about an item that's not listed here. We'll take public comment. Is anybody interested in speaking?
caller with phone number ending with 267. You have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Thanks, Mr. Leonard and Chair Lee. It's Ken Garber again. I know it's late, so I'll be brief. Thank you for hearing me twice tonight. Listening to the discussion, I'm taking away that a big part of the rationale for changing public hearings to public comment is that it's important to be honest and upfront about the opportunity to influence a project on the part of the public. We don't want the public to have the impression that they can change the project when they can't, and that this is an administrative process, not a political one. Strictly speaking, of course, I completely understand that that's the case. And I would agree with these comments if the UDC were a full and complete expression of the community's wishes around development. Then we could say, well, it just has to meet the UDC's requirements and we approve it. But I don't think any of you would say that the UDC meets that ideal. 2 obvious areas for me where it doesn't are in the areas of affordable housing, where we're not getting enough and we don't require it, and fossil fuels, where we're getting too much and we can't require electrification, can't ban gas hookups. This is where I think I don't make a distinction between by right and discretionary projects, because I think the public comment has equal value. Yes, the public needs to understand that you can't turn down a site plan, but we need to communicate. We need to let developers know what our community expects out of a project. And yes, public comment for by right developments is a very blunt instrument. It's not ideal, but it's one more tool we can use to accomplish our community goals. For me, affordable housing and sustainability. Just to give a couple of examples, I thank Commissioner Abrams for giving me credit for making valuable comments, but just last month, a developer at 1208 South University approached me after the vote and said it's because of me and people like me that they're going all electric on projects like this, even though they don't have to.
30 more
now,
seconds.
I don't know if he's just being nice. I'm not trying to give myself excess credit. I'm just saying there's just as much value, I think, in public comment for by right projects as there is for discretionary ones. And I think it's important to keep the current process. Thank you for the going late tonight and for the thorough discussion. I look forward to talking more.
Thank you, Mr. Garber. Mr. Leonard, do we have any other callers for public comment?
No other viewers, listeners have indicated that they would like to address the commission.
Got it. All right, thank you. We'll give it 2 more seconds to see. Okay, with that, we'll close the last public comment, and the last item is adjournment. So thank you, everyone, for a great discussion, and have a great evening. See ya.